Join our Patreon.
Do you really want to know? We are Mythvision.
Dr. Price, we have a question. Clyde McGee, and I'm not certain, but I suspect is an Israel-only proponent. The teaching that only salvation is for Israelites in the biblical narrative, the 66-book canon. That's pretty much what we find, according to them, is that everything is biological descent. Typically, there's very few out there that believe that covenantal aspects, that outsiders could possibly join Israel. But most of them make the arguments and try to die on the hill that no outsiders that were not somehow descended from Abraham could find their way into the 12 tribes, period. You had to be from the seed, literally, of Abraham. Here's a couple of questions dealing with salvation, Clyde says. Salvation, redemption. Is the redemption salvation message for all people all over the world, or was it the only ever promise to Israel? They believe, of course, it's only to Israel, but he's wanting to know if it's for all people or only for Israelites, as if the New Testament has to be one or the other, and you can't find any type of both even playing a part. Were any other nations under God's laws, or did he deal only with Israel? And were any other nations under God's laws? Okay, sorry, I asked that. Ask Dr. Bob how he sees Hebrews 9:15 through 21, and does that apply to anyone living today? Have we, in all caps, quotations, pagans and heathens, added ourselves into Israel's redemptive story? Now, Israel only will say yes. Christians, faux Christianity has. I want to read Hebrews 9:15 through 21, and then you can respond if that's okay. But keep in mind, the Israel-only proponents also do not believe that outsiders typically could join even in the Old Testament, in the first covenant, in the first, they call it heavens and earth, not literally. They think the first heavens and earth is the first covenant. Therefore, when the new heavens and new earth comes, it's all covenantal, not literal. It's a full preterist aspect. It's not. So I'm sorry for those who are watching. This is a little complicated, but this is what's going on. Now, Hebrews 9. Let me read this to you. Book of Hebrews 9 and verse 25, I believe. Let me double check that. Sorry, verse 15 to 21. All right, here we go. All right. For this reason, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that since a death has taken place for the redemption of the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant, those who have been called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. They believe that's Israel only. For where a covenant is, there must be of necessity be the death of one who made it. For a covenant is valid only when men are dead. For it is never enforced while the one who made it lives. Therefore, even the first covenant was not inaugurated without blood. For when every commandment had been spoken by Moses to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of the calves and the goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both on the book itself and all the people. Now, they think all the people here is only exclusively the biological descendants of Abraham. You know, when a great multitude left Egypt, I'm just giving you reference of here. I don't know exactly what they want to say there, but they're not Israelites. But they don't have become Israelites. So this is only for Israelites here, even with Moses. And I think there's people who would challenge that. But anyway, verse 20, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant which God commanded you. And in the same way he sprinkled both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry with the blood. And according to the law, one may almost say all things are cleansed with blood, and without shedding of blood there is no forgiveness. Therefore it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter the holy place made with hands." Okay, I think I'm going past the points he's making. You get the gist. The first covenant, it's only Israelites. He only came to redeem those under the first covenant, according to them. And how do you deal with that? By the way, they're going to try and say Hebrews, Paul, Peter, James, Gospels, Revelation, all the letters are all teaching this one message. I'm going to ask the question for them in the way he did in a way. Were non-Israelite pagans, according to anywhere in Paul's letters, welcomed into this and are being saved from judgment or anything like that in any way? Because Hebrews seems like it sounds only talking about people under the first covenant and only Israelites according to Israel only. What are your thoughts?
Well, that may be, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he wouldn't have had something to say about the salvation of non-Israelites or non-Jews. It's like Baptists and others that believe in adult convert baptism. They'll say, well, look at what it says in Romans about what baptism is. You're dying and rising with Christ. You're leaving the body of sin behind and so on. How could that apply to babies? On the Calvinist equation of baptism with circumcision, that it's an initiation into the covenant. It doesn't require knowing what it's all about. Eventually you will, and that's why Calvinists have confirmation and other similar denominations. Well, the answer to that is that Paul is discussing what happens with people who convert to Christianity. We don't know what he might have thought or not thought about what do you do if you're a Christian and you have children? What do you do with them? Certainly you're going to raise them as Christians. So is it just a ridiculous charade to wait a while and have them baptized as if they were sinners up to now but are not going to be anymore? So they say if he had been discussing, as Luke does in the book of Acts, what happens when a convert has kids and the whole family converts, he would have explained that differently. There'd be a different rationale. So you can't just assume that something discussed in one way is the only way in which the matter could come up. In 1 Corinthians, he talks about what communion means. Well, that's the only place communion ever comes up in the Pauline epistles. Do we assume that only Corinthians celebrated the Eucharist? No. So you can't assume that every passage is the be-all and end-all, even if Paul wrote them. But I think of something in Romans that deals with the law, with Israel, and with Gentiles. Let's see. In 3:9, then what? Do we Jews have an advantage over Gentiles? Not at all. For we have already charged both Jews and Greeks that they are all under sin's power. As it is written, there is none righteous, not even one. No one has understanding, no one is a searcher after God. All have strayed, they have together become worthless. There is none doing right, not even one. Their throats are open graves, with their tongues they deceive. Venom of asps is behind their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift for shedding blood. Ruin and misery are in their ways, and they have not known the path of peace. There's no reverence for God before their eyes. These are all quotes from the Psalms. Then he says, now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under its control, so that every mouth may be shut and the whole world may become liable to divine retribution. Because not a single human being will be made righteous in God's sight through observance of the law. But through the law comes the knowledge of sin. But now, apart from the law, God's righteousness is revealed, as is witnessed to by the law and the prophets, namely God's righteousness through faith in Jesus Christ for all believers. For there's no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of God's moral excellence. We are justified freely by his grace through the ransom that Christ Jesus provided, whom God put forward as a reconciling sacrifice through faith in his blood. This was for the vindication of his righteousness in forgiving the sins that previously were committed under God's forbearance, and to vindicate his righteousness at the present time, that he is righteous and that he accepts as righteous him that has faith in Jesus. Where then does boasting come in? It is ruled out. Through what sort of law? Of works? No, indeed, but through the law of faith. For we come to the conclusion that a man is justified by faith without the works of the law. Or is he God of the Jews only? Is he not also the God of the Gentiles? He is the Gentiles' God as well. Since there is but one God, he will justify the circumcised for their belief and the uncircumcised through their faith. Well, you can start saying, but Gentiles really means Jews and Israel. What the heck? If it's that ambiguous, how are you able to formulate any theory of what Paul means? It's like a Rorschach blot that can mean anything. And this is the whole deal with Abraham was justified by faith before there was a Torah. And it's the same way now with Jews and Gentiles. And so it seems to me that you really got to twist the text to say otherwise. This reminds me of how Calvinism is committed to the idea of the limited atonement, or as they now prefer to say less offensively, the definite atonement. Yeah, it's the limited atonement. I remember once I was headed for the parking pit at Montclair State College. They had the quarry where it was like Journey to the Center of the Earth. You had to go down different levels to park. And I'm listening to some Christian radio station, and there's some song I'd never heard before, and it says the singer is as if talking to some unbeliever who won't accept the gospel, and he says, well, if you laughing this off or you're not accepting this, I guess he didn't die for you. And I thought, oh my God, the limited atonement set to music. He only died for the elect, the ones God had predestined. What about God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, etc.? Well, the Calvinists say, the world means just the elect. What? It's like black means white. Flat means round. You can't just start redefining things so that if they meant that, it would fit into the thing. There's an irony here also, because one of these passages in Romans 3, where it says that, let me just read that teeny bit again, because it's good to have in mind. Here we are. We, in 24 and following, we are justified freely by his grace through the ransom that Christ Jesus provided, whom God put forward as a reconciling sacrifice through faith in his blood. This was for the vindication of his righteousness in forgiving the sins that previously were committed under God's forbearance, and to vindicate his righteousness at the present time, that he is righteous and that he accepts as righteous him that has faith in Jesus. There is a great dissertation written by a guy named Sam K. Williams called Jesus' Death as Saving Event. And he says that many scholars have thought that most of what I just read that second time was a previous statement of theology that Paul is quoting and making his own. I mean, it's almost like quoting a Bible verse, though that doesn't happen to be one. And he said he thinks, and he does this great argument for it, saying that this harks back to Hellenistic Judaism's view of martyrdom as an atoning sacrifice, which we find in 2nd and 4th Maccabees, neglected by Protestants. 4th Maccabees is an astonishing Stoic philosophical tract using the martyrs of the Torah and in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes to say, you see, reason can prevail over emotion, so these guys never would have stood up under this torture. And so it goes into the whole thing, and both these books really do tell the same story, that there are 7 brothers and an old man, an elder, all very pious. And Antiochus Epiphanes says, all you got to do is to have this pork rind here, this ham sandwich, and just take a bite. It won't hurt you, and that's all I'm asking. And of course, he knew this was forbidden by the Torah, and so these guys will be breaking the Torah, or in effect repudiating it, and they're not going to do it. And both the old man and one of the brothers prays just before getting horribly tortured. I mean, it's really grim stuff in the text. God, please accept my death on behalf of your people to ease up on this terrible persecution. And the idea is that you wouldn't have let this happen to us if we hadn't fallen away from the law and been so sloppy in our observance. That's why we asked for it. But we, individuals here, didn't. In fact, we're being put to death because we're faithful to the Torah. So how about taking our shed blood as an atonement for our people so that you can call off the persecution? And this became the Jewish, Hellenistic Jewish doctrine of martyrdom. The righteous it's like a theodicy argument. Why do the righteous suffer, and why do these pagan bastards keep going from one victory to another? Williams says that he thinks that the original point of this was this use of it in the text that has been put into Romans, was to say, you know, we Jews, now Christians, have been sanctified by the Levitical sacrifices all our lives, but the poor dumb pagans haven't been. Could it be that God has accepted the shedding of the blood of Christ as an equivalent sacrifice on their behalf? So it's to make up for the Levitical purifications they never had. I mean, they all thought that the Gentiles were unclean, which is why you couldn't eat with them. It didn't mean you hated them or anything like that, but they weren't observing, nor were they asked to observe the terms of the covenant. But now some of these people are becoming Christians in greater and greater numbers. Can they? Or are they still reeking of the paganism, all the ham they ate, all the shrimp they ate, and all the other things that were okay as non-Jews, even if they were God-fearers who attended synagogue but didn't actually convert, circumcision and all that. If they are to be united with your people, mustn't they be purified ceremonially as we always have been? Well, maybe that's why Jesus died, to cover them. And that's kind of what Ephesians and 1 Peter say, too. And the irony is that this began as a way of including non-Jews into the house of Israel. Okay, you're clean, you can be part of it now. But as time went on, and Gentile Christians really didn't care about ceremonial purity, as Romans makes clear later on, the original meaning of this was lost, and Christians began to say that the problem is not for non-Jews, because okay, they can be Christians, But what about the non-Christian Jews? They're not availing themselves of the blood of Christ. And it was forgotten that the original rationale. Maybe we need to press on them the need for belief in the shed blood of Christ. That will make it possible for them to join the club. And the whole thing reversed once Gentile Christians had become the majority in the church and forgotten about the original rationale. Which is pretty interesting because it reflects on this whole issue from a completely different perspective. And it does assume that the non-Jews are Greeks, Arabs, Persians, etc., etc. I find that much more plausible. What they're saying, just I cannot see it. We know there were Christians that believed the pagans could become Christians and be saved, but it also says in Romans something quite germane to this, I think, where he raises the question of what about the Gentiles, that didn't have the Torah. Oh, let's see.
I know the reference you're talking about too, yeah.
Yeah, boy. Oh, boy, let's see. Well, basically, he says, what about the pagans that didn't have the law? And he said, well, they...
or those outside the law, those...
And they had the law written on their hearts. And I thought this would be a little easier to find. But that seems to be... Oh, wait a minute, yeah. Ooh, sorry about this.
Romans 2?
Probably.
2:15?
Yeah, yes. Well, how about 2:12 and following? Mm-hmm. Those who sin without knowing the law will be lost without reference to the law, while those who sin under the law will be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are righteous before God, but those who practice the law will be pronounced righteous. For when Gentiles who lack the law do naturally practice it, they are for themselves a law, or a law unto themselves, though they have none. They show that what the law requires is written in their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their thoughts accuse or defend one another. They will be judged on that day when God will judge the secrets of men through Christ Jesus in agreement with the good news I preach. And so forth. So, I mean, that seems pretty clear to me that these people that have never read the Torah nonetheless have an active conscience, or at least some do, and those who do didn't need the Torah to learn it. And those who don't live up to it, well, they wouldn't have, even if they'd have had it, probably.
See, the problem is, and this is where we start to get into complex things and why it goes further, is that immediately in that context it mentioned that he will judge all men through Jesus Christ, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the judgment, full preterist will tell you, was in 70 A.D. It was the Jerusalem temple. So how could he judge all men if all men were not all men? Because all men referenced here is 70 A.D. because they think Paul is the end of the age argument in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13. They take that end of the age judgment and they equate that to Paul's judgment and what Paul means by judgment. And so they do this throughout the entire New Testament. They let this gospel narrative of the eschaton that was supposed to happen with the judgment, which happened at Jerusalem, shadow all of it. And therefore, why would he need to save the pagans? They're not going to be in the Jerusalem temple. You see how all these things create a pathway that they can't see out of because they have all these other notions. And you're not denying Matthew 24 is the judgment, according to the Gospels, the Synoptics, but there's also implications that John starts to break away from some of this thing. So there's eschatology, and this is why fracturing the text to let the text be its own text, let Paul's ideas be Paul, even be skeptical of each book that Paul writes, because there's maybe interpolations, there might be some issues there. This is why I love critical scholarship, because he could have died for everyone in one passage, whatever that may mean, everyone in the known world, whatever the oikumene, whatever, the cosmos, etc. And then in other places, he could have died only for the Jews, or appearingly to only die for those who were Jews. Maybe the book of Hebrews is saying that. Maybe that. So that's the point I'm trying to convey. The IO full preterists are using the same harmonization methodological approach the Christians have used, but they're capitalizing on it without a pope or a priest or a pastor telling you, don't go there. No. There is no boundaries to what they're willing to try and interpret. I'll end on this note, Dr. Price. I just want your facial expression on camera while I say this. It was recently said that the demons even shudder in James. The demons are the high priest or someone that are Jewish, okay? Because if you go to the Gospels, right, he calls them devils, serpents, etc., which Satan and his angels were cast into the lake of fire at judgment, 70 A.D.
It's just, you can make it mean anything you want. It's that way. It's just playing a game that is fascinating to some, but I just find it completely unpersuasive.
Join our Patreon